If you decide to work as a DoorDasher, never go into the house. So I signed up as a DoorDash driver about 8 months ago. Not much income, even compared to my crappy day job. But it helps pay child support and keeps the pantry stocked with Sprite and Cheez-Its for when my son Andy stays with me on the weekends. Strap in RedditReelOnes fans, you will never look at your Uber Eats drivers in the eye again. I never thought there was anything special about Maple Green Road until about a week ago. At least I think it was a week ago. It's been hard to keep track. Before this DoorDash order, I thought the street was nothing but your standard outdated 90s neighborhood, featuring houses with overgrown shrubs and trees decorated with tire swings and faded birdhouses. But the house belonging to the Johnsons, according to their DoorDash account, felt wrong as soon as I drove up. It was just a red brick 2-story cookie-cutter build like the rest of the street, with a lawn that needed to be mowed. But somehow, I didn't think I'd noticed this particular house before. Something about the architecture made the front windows look like a row of watching eyes, the porch, just a couple of steps leading up to a stoop, like a snarl. Looking back now, I should have driven away. But the delivery instructions had mentioned there would be a $20 tip, which was astronomical as far as DoorDash goes. I put my car in park by the curb, took my phone off its dashboard mount, and grabbed the oversized paper bag of Wendy's food from my passenger seat. As I stepped up onto the sidewalk, I hit the "I've arrived at customer" button on my Dasher app. I set foot on the path leading to their front door, blinked, and found myself no longer on the path. Instead, I stood on the other side of the road, and I mean all the way across the road. I saw my car, flashers on, parked in front of the red brick home, and I was 10 yards away from it. I'd like to think that I'm a pretty level-headed guy who isn't prone to exaggeration, but the feeling of wrongness intensified. On the peak of the roof, a weather vane shaped like a raven started to spin, flashing in the early evening sunlight. I didn't feel any wind that could have moved it. Somehow, even then, I thought I must have imagined it. I thought I must have gotten turned around getting out of the car. I shrugged off the weird feeling. It had been a long day at work. That was definitely it, I told myself. I must have gotten distracted and went the wrong way. Comforted, stupidly, by my own rationalization, I walked back across the street and up the path. When I was halfway across the yard, a kid's face emerged in a window on the right side of the house. It was a teenage boy wearing a baseball cap. I could see his face fairly clearly for how dark it was inside the house. He was looking at my car, his eyes narrowed in what seemed to be confusion. But when he saw me coming up over the curb again, his expression gave way to excitement. Or maybe it was relief. He must have been pretty hungry. He waved in greeting, but before I could wave back, he looked over his shoulder and stepped away from the window. I stepped up onto the porch, frowning, and my phone buzzed in my hand. A DoorDash notification popped up on the screen. The Johnsons. The door is unlocked. Leave the food on the table. Thanks. I looked up at the front door. It had a window in the center, granting me a view into the house. Straight ahead, I could see a dining room with a large table at its center, framed by another large window at the back of the house. All the lights inside were off. The weird feeling I'd tried to push away came rushing back. Everything about this situation seemed very wrong. Huge tip or not, there was no chance I was going inside that house. I set the food down and opened my Dasher app. "Sorry," I typed. "DoorDash policy says I can't go inside a private home to deliver orders. You'll have to grab it from the porch." I wasn't even sure if that was true, but I didn't wait for a reply. I turned away from the door and headed down the steps, tapping the complete delivery button as I went. I was distracted enough that I walked right into something. The door. I walked into the front door of the house. I had been heading towards my car one moment, and the next, my forehead bumped against that glass window set in the front door. My throat felt tight as I stepped back. The house seemed to crouch over me, the stoop suddenly claustrophobic like the mouth of a cave. My phone lit up with another message. "We can't open the door from inside. Put the food on the table. Leave the door open when you come in." I didn't bother to reply. I turned away again, refusing to stay here any longer. My foot almost reached the first stair, but landed on the stoop instead, the door only inches from my face once again. "What is this?" I breathed, my heart pounding so hard I could feel my veins pulsing in my neck. 4 more messages came in then, one right after the next in a staccato series of buzzes. You can't leave unless you put it on the table now that you're here. It won't let you leave. Please, please leave the door open. My insides turned to ice as I read. It wouldn't let me leave? What the hell was it? I had no idea what was going on here, and all I wanted was to get away from this house. I looked over my shoulder at my car, the flashers still blinking where I'd left it, and somehow knew I wouldn't be able to reach it. Not unless I followed the instructions and left the stupid food on the table. I wish I'd tried anyway. Even if I was stuck in an endless loop of trying to get to my car, it still would have been better than sealing my fate by setting foot inside the house. No point wishing for that now, though. I picked up the Wendy's bag from the porch, turned the doorknob, and stepped inside. The house was quiet and dim, the only light coming from the windows shaded by trees outside. I found myself in a central hall that stretched forward to the dining room table. There wasn't much other furniture to be seen, just a grandfather clock that looked like it was manufactured in the 80s. The table didn't even have chairs. Over my head, a 2-story alcove housed a simple chandelier, its metal frame glinting in the sunlight from a window near the high ceiling. I was scared. Looking back, I know that I was right to be scared, but I was still nowhere near as scared as I should have been. Was this some kind of haunting? Some kind of delayed acid trip? I had no explanation for my situation, despite my racing thoughts. Whatever it was, I just needed to put the damn Wendy's bag on the table. I left the door half open and made my way deeper into the house, my sneakers squeaking on the tile floor. The table was framed by that window at the back of the dining room, making it seem like it was highlighted in a video game. Here's your objective: reach it and move on. The entryway seemed to be stretching longer as I walked. Surely the people who'd been sending messages were around here somewhere. The window where I'd seen the teenage boy had been on the right side of the house. But for now, everything was silent. Halfway to the dining room, another darker hall led off to my right. It seemed like it might lead to bedrooms or offices, but I couldn't see anything more than smooth walls and shadows. I couldn't even make out doors. I had almost reached the table when a scent caught my attention. I hadn't noticed it when I first came in, but it was a little sweet, a little metallic, and a lot like something wet dripped against my leg. It slid from below the hem of my shorts, along my calf. In the dim light, the wet streak on my leg was a red so dark it almost looked black. It was coming from the Wendy's bag. Blood, sticky and wet, and soaking the bottom of the paper bag. I knew there was normal food in there. I'd smelled it during the entire drive from Wendy's. The stuff dripping was probably a busted ketchup packet, or some burger grease, or, deep in the house, a door closed. My breath hitched in my throat. I ran the rest of the way to the table and tossed the bag onto it. It puddled onto the cherry wood surface, the bottom thoroughly soaked. The light coming through the big dining room window was getting darker. Were those stars in the sky outside? Hadn't it only been 5:30? It was July. It shouldn't have been getting dark yet. It didn't matter. I was leaving. I stepped back from the table but couldn't pull my eyes away from the paper bag. The blood had spread, masking Wendy's grinning face in a film of red. For the last time, my phone buzzed with a burst of messages. Leave run right now and leave the door open, leave. I shoved my phone in my pocket and ran. The front door was still half open, giving me a clear path to my car where it sat, flashing its blinkers by the curb. The paper bag crunched on the table a dozen steps behind me, and at the same time something else darted out from the hallway to my left. I yelped, but it was the kid I'd seen in the window, wearing his baseball cap. He grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the half-open door. "Run!" he said, his voice hoarse, as if he hadn't used it in months. "While it eats the food. We have to go before—" Something plopped onto the floor in front of us. The Wendy's bag, torn, soaked with blood. The kid ground to a halt, and I nearly barreled over him in my attempt to stop. He was looking up. I followed his gaze. In the dim light of the alcove above, where the window was now darkened and the chandelier barely visible, something was looking down at us. Something with a confusing mix of shapes, slick curves like the frames of chairs forming ribs, the bloated swell of overstuffed couch cushions forming lumpy sides, the glinting points of a dozen kitchen knives and silver forks forming jagged teeth, and bones, human bones, sticking out at odd angles. The kid had time to make a brief, strangled groan. That was it. and then the thing overhead moved in a flick of motion. A tendril made of twisted bedsheets snapped towards us and hooked the kid around the throat. He screamed as it yanked him up, and as I stumbled back, knives thunked into flesh. His screams stopped. The entire house creaked. Somehow, it sounded pleased. The thing began squelching and crunching over my head, eating. I darted for the door, but as I reached for the handle to pull it the rest of the way open, it slammed itself shut. The grandfather clock on the wall clanged once. Somewhere deeper in the house, I heard doors opening and slamming shut. The house was laughing at me. I grabbed the handle and tried to turn, but it wouldn't budge. It wasn't even locked. I could see that the deadbolt was open, but the handle was just fixed in place. I was trapped. Overhead, the creature made a sound like chairs scraping across the floor. I made the mistake of looking up at it. The thing's legs uncurled from the chandelier, made of wire hangers that seemed too flimsy to support its bulk. It stabbed its feet into the drywall and lunged towards me. I dove. Sheets brushed against the back of my calves, warm and wet and sticky. I scrambled into the dark hallway and sprinted as fast as my legs would carry me. The hallway seemed to stretch for dozens of yards, more distance than should have fit into the home that I'd seen from outside. My lungs burned, my breath rasping through my throat, but I ran until I crashed headlong into a door. I breathed a prayer of thanks as it opened, then slammed the door shut behind me. I looked around for furniture I could shove against it, but I was in a small bathroom, and nothing was here except the toilet and vanity anchored to the wall. In the space next to the toilet, a window looked out to a darkened street. I could see my car parked by the curb. Its flashers would keep going until its battery died, and it would sit there until some neighbor called a tow truck and had it pulled away. I think it's been a week since I got here. I'm not sure why that creature can't seem to reach me in this bathroom, but I've hardly attempted to leave. The bathroom window won't open or break, and the only time I managed to reach the front door, the knob still didn't budge. I barely made it back to the bathroom alive, so I'm just hoping this post will make it out and catch someone's attention. My phone doesn't seem to be working right, and no one who's walked by the house has even seemed to notice that it's here. I think that's why they towed my car. My phone is nearly dead, but if you see this post, the address is Ginsenbobem Ninek. I won't use you as bait, not like the Johnsons tried to do with me. Just please, when you get to the porch, if you can get to the porch, leave the door open.